Welcome along. Today we're doing something a bit different, stepping back to July 1st, 1935.
We are indeed, and our window into that world. It's the Daily Worker newspaper, both the London and Chicago editions.
Exactly. We've got the sources right here, and our aim is to explore how they reported the world from their very particular, left-wing, class-conscious viewpoint.
It's fascinating to see what they focused on, what they highlighted, and, well, the narrative they were building for their readers back then.
So we'll look at the key stories, the interesting details, and try to understand the message they were putting across. I'll handle the London side of things first.
And then I'll jump in with the view from the Daily Worker in Chicago, see how things looked from the U.S. perspective on that same day.
Right. Let's get started then. First big theme from London, the shadow of fascism. It's clearly a major concern.
Absolutely dominates the early pages.
They're pushing hard for something called International Failman Day, planned for July 6th and 7th.
Yeah, and reading this, it's clearly much more than just, a symbolic day. It's a call for direct action.
They frame it as a mobilization, bringing international solidarity against what they explicitly call fascist executioners.
And the target is specific: Hitler. They want this day to be a significant blow against his regime.
Ernst Thälmann himself, they describe him as the leader of Germany's anti-fascist movement, the working class movement, and he's in jail.
Right. So campaigning for his release isn't just humanitarian for them, it's strategic.
Right.
It's part of the fight to actually defeat fascism, to undermine Hitler.
They're calling on, well, basically everyone opposed to fascism workers groups, individuals to join in. They see it as a really crucial stand against the Nazi criminals.
It really shows their belief in unified international action as the only way to counter the fascist threat.
And speaking of the Nazi regime, there's this interesting piece about Danzig. Suggests maybe things weren't quite so solid internally?
Ah, yes, the president of the Danzig Diet resigning. That was apparently just yesterday in their reporting.
And not just resigning his post, but quitting the Nazi Party altogether.
And crucially, the paper says over 100 other former Nazis resigned with him. That's quite significant.
The Daily Worker definitely presents it that way. They call it one of the biggest crises for the Nazis since they took power, a power, they quickly add, gained through terrorism and oppression.
So for their readers, this Danzig story would have been a sign, maybe a small one, but a sign that the Nazi regime wasn't invincible, that dissent was possible, even growing.
Okay, shifting focus a bit, the paper turns a really critical eye towards the British government, especially on rearmament.
Oh, very critical. They basically accuse the national government of enabling Germany to rearm in the first place.
And then, the argument goes, the government is using the fear created by this rearmed Germany to push its own armament program.
Exactly. Positioning themselves as the savior of the people is how the paper puts it. But the Daily Worker sees this not as protection,
but as something that's actually made the danger of war, especially aerial warfare, much worse. They claim it's increased 100-fold in just the past year.
It's a very strong accusation.
Mm-hmm.
And they question the logic. Why treble the Air Force? Why build up the Army and Navy, enforce Gath mask drills?
They point out that France isn't seen as the threat. It's always Germany that's mentioned.
Right. And their conclusion is pretty stark. This kind of arms race, it inevitably leads to war. They explicitly reference 1914 as proof.
So what's their alternative? What should a peace-concerned government have done?
Well, they argue such a government would have stood firm against German rearmament right from the start.
Yeah.
That would have opened the door for, general disarmament.
And supported things like the proposed Eastern Pact.
Yes, exactly. Insisted on Germany signing a mutual assistance pact with France and the Soviet Union. They contrast this sharply with what they see as Sir John Simon's appeasement policies.
There's even a bit of satire quoted, isn't there, from a Romanian paper?
Yeah, Iggy hit. It's quite pointed, listing these absurd fictional weapons for the British government like dancing and singing tanks, going 550 miles per hour singing Nazi anthems.
Or massive guns shooting from Berlin to Moscow with the slight drawback they might shoot back.
It really highlights the perceived madness of the arms race, the kind of technological one-upmanship that felt both terrifying and, well, darkly ridiculous.
Okay, so beyond Europe, the Daily Worker also looks at the British Empire. Resistance and oppression are key themes here.
Definitely. There's a report from a Congress featuring a speech by J.B. Campbell.
And he connects the plunder of China directly to British imperial policy.
Yes, arguing it wasn't just some distant event. He claims it directly worsened the peace situation back in Europe.
He makes three key points, doesn't he?
He does. First, Britain should renounce its special claims in China. Second, it needs to cooperate with other powers to stop further aggression there.
And the third one,
Yeah.
it's quite a challenge to Britain itself.
Very much so. He argues Britain's attitude towards Japan stemmed from its own imperial position. It boils down to a choice: empire or peace. A stark warning about the consequences of imperialism.
Then we have a story from Canada. Seems like a victory against censorship.
Tim Buck, General Secretary of the Communist Party of Canada. Just released from prison, actually.
And he managed to speak on the radio, despite the Canadian Radio Commission explicitly forbidding it.
The paper presents this as a clear win for mass action. People power overcoming state control. A real morale booster for their readers, you imagine.
And from India, a different mood. Reports of tremendous resentment.
Towards a speech by Sir George Schuster, a former high-ranking official in the Viceroy's Council.
The Daily Worker labels him a typical imperialist, and the detail that delegates couldn't even question him due to time constraints.
Really underscores the frustration, the lack of dialogue in the colonial setup. It highlights that feeling of being silenced.
Japanese expansionism gets mentioned again, mainly in that context of China and British policy enabling it.
Yes, the London report focuses more on that link, that imperialist collaboration angle, rather than providing, say, new field reports from Asia in this particular issue. It's about the interconnectedness of global power plays.
Okay, let's turn to news from the Soviet Union. The tone here is, well, quite different.
Markedly so. Very positive portrayals. There's a big piece on Physical Culture Day in Moscow.
A huge demonstration, apparently. 110,000 young people marching in Red Square.
And they boast of 10 million physical culturists in Russia now, with millions holding this GTO badge.
Which signifies passing tests in swimming, rowing, skiing, shooting, all sorts of things.
It paints a picture of national health, discipline, readiness.
Right.
A strong, unified society. That's the clear message.
And they even mention an upcoming talk in London about holidays in Soviet Russia.
Right, organized by the Friends of the Soviet Union. Clearly an effort to promote a positive image, maybe contrasted favorably with life in Britain.
Okay, bringing it back home to the UK. The paper dives into domestic issues, injustice, inequality, labor struggles, starting with the miners.
Yeah, serious trouble brewing. Men at a large colliery are greatly dissatisfied with a wage agreement.
60 men apparently walked out over minimum wage issues.
And then they held a meeting and decided not to work Friday night or Monday morning. And it's spreading.
To another colliery owned by the same company, Gamdrift. Seems like coordinated action by the South Wales Miners Federation members.
It points to deep-seated anger over wages, not just isolated incidents.
And the railwaymen, too. Their big annual meeting is happening today.
At Hastings, a packed agenda of 74 items. Wages, hours, rationalization, the usual industrial stuff.
But also politics war, fascism, the United Front, international trade union unity. Shows how interconnected these issues were for them.
Absolutely. And the wage fight is described as long and bitter, going back to cuts in 1931.
They got small concessions last year, but the feeling is strong for full restoration, especially for things like overtime and Sunday rates.
It reflects that ongoing economic pressure on working families.
There's also pushback against union leadership itself. A report from a transport and general workers union branch in Turkey.
Yes, they're protesting what they see as the TUC, the Trades Union Congress, trying to dictate who local branches should elect.
They call the TUC leadership the real disruptors for issuing this Circular 16.
And there's a sharp comment about knighthoods given to union leaders like Citrine and Pew being for services rendered, hinting at, well, collusion with the establishment.
So tensions within the labor movement itself.
Definitely. Ideological battles playing out.
Another dispute involves garage workers. Seems like it could escalate.
There was a complaint about disciplinary procedures, delays, injustice against two men. The board promised to investigate. But a meeting over the weekend with reps from 10 other garages showed strong support for demanding the charges be dropped entirely.
And a big delegates meeting is scheduled for this evening to consider fleet action if the men aren't cleared.
Which means potentially wider strikes affecting bus services. Nunhead services were already hit. It's a developing situation.
Then there's this really sad and quite scandalous story about a lost ship, the La Crescenta.
Yes, the Daily Worker is highlighting the plight of the families, the dependents, and they claim letters from the drowned captain exposed the ship's poor condition.
A former seaman named Marks apparently wrote confirming this, calling the captain a good friend.
And the paper insists the National Union of Seamen has a duty to find Marks and get him to testify at the inquiry.
An inquiry that only happened because of a question in Parliament earlier in the year.
It's a story about alleged negligence, the human cost, and the struggle to get answers and accountability.
In crime news, Britain's first police radio manhunt is ongoing.
For Alan James Grierson, wanted for the murder of Mrs. Louise Gann in London. They're using wireless broadcasts from Brighton Police Station to coordinate the search.
Wanted for murder notices are up nationwide. A very modern crime story from 1935.
Indeed, the use of radio technology is quite novel here.
The paper also picks up on the long-running issue of injustice to leaseholders, quoting the Daily Telegraph, surprisingly.
Yes, about leaseholders facing high rents, unfair terms, with seemingly no redress.
The writer notes it's been debated for 50 years, but Parliament hasn't acted, blaming the influence of large landowners initially, and now planning authorities.
They call for government adjudication, citing a case where owners face huge rent on an unlettable property, which has knock-on effects, lost contracts, no new machinery, engineers out of work.
It shows how these property issues impact the wider economy and working people.
Definitely. Now, we've touched on poverty and unemployment through the strikes, but the Prime Minister, Mr. Baldwin, offered a rather different take recently.
Yes, speaking near Leeds. He talked about the government's achievements, utilizing forces of all men of goodwill.
Claimed success better and more quickly than any other country. It didn't promise to cure unemployment, but claimed improvement through creating confidence.
He cited rising export trade figures, predicted world-leading steel output.
A very optimistic picture from the top. The Daily Worker's perspective, focusing on the strikes and wage disputes, would obviously present a stark contrast to this. They'd likely see it as glossing over the real hardship.
Right. Now let's move into some of the more human interest stories reported in the UK paper. These offer glimpses into everyday life and public mood. There is a huge mass meeting of citizens reported.
Sounded quite impressive. Disciplined, columns of marchers, banners from labor, communists, churches, League of Nations groups, co-op vans. A real cross-section.
Loads of London mayors present, prominent speakers like Dr. Hugh Dalton, Beverly Nichols.
And they passed a resolution unanimously against the arms race, specifically air forces, calling for abolition and international control of civil aviation.
It shows a strong public anti-war sentiment, a desire for a different path than the government was taking.
Absolutely. And linked to that, there was a counter-protest at the big Hendon Air display.
Activists distributing leaflets, holding poster parades.
Apparently, they even forced some black shirts out of one area where they held a meeting. And some people who came for the air show stayed for the peace meeting instead.
Though there were clashes, too, police reportedly broke through protest lines near the display. Using inspired methods sounds like heavy-handed tactics.
And that chilling observation of the reporter watching the planes overhead looking like lovely toys, quite harmless from afar, while knowing the reality of war preparations, a powerful contrast.
And then there's that deeply tragic story from the Yorkshire Moors, the young married couple.
Maurice and Gertrude Bongers, found dead in their car, suicide pact.
The detail about Maurice feeling everything was going wrong, the world on the brink of suicide, it reflects a certain despair, maybe linked to the times.
Possibly. And the meticulous way they sealed the car, the letters left behind, just profoundly sad. And the fact that Gertrude was a qualified architect, lives cut short.
There's also a record of a tiger attack at a zoo in Poplar.
2 young boys got their feet pinned by the cage. Sounds terrifying. Tigers roaring, kids screaming.
Attendants had to lift the cage. One boy was critically injured. A reminder of the dangers, even in controlled environments.
And a bit of mystery on the Sussex coast. A balloon drifting in from the channel.
Nobody knew where it came from or where it was going, just floated over, causing excitement among holidaymakers. Adds a little intrigue.
A small fire on Eastbourne Pier caused a dash for safety, but thankfully it was put out quickly. Caused by a cigarette, they think.
A moment of private grief amidst public ceremony. News of a drowning reached a man attending a service at Windsor Castle.
Mr. J. Cole. His son drowned in a bathing accident. A very somber note.
And some celebrity gossip. Film star Pola Negri announced she's marrying an unnamed English MP.
Adds a touch of glamour and speculation to the news pages.
The Hendener display itself drew huge crowds, 500,000 people, becoming a rival to Ascot for fashion, apparently.
So despite the protests, it was still a major public spectacle showcasing military might.
A more historical commemoration saw over 1,600 old soldiers, the diehards of the Middlesex Regiment, marching in London.
Remembering their history, marching to the cenotaph, a display of regimental pride.
In the world of gambling, big changes were coming for greyhound racing.
The tote system was returning, modified to meet new rules. Seen as a severe blow to traditional bookmakers, they even held ghost meetings to test the new system. Professionalization.
Manchester's Town Hall extension was getting a new stone facade.
From a Derbyshire quarry, described as maybe the finest building stone in the country, chosen carefully to match the existing building. Civic pride and architecture.
An unusual report about native crocodile catchers in some unnamed region.
Presented as a lucrative business. These catchers supposedly have an uncanny power over crocodiles using talk, drums, rituals.
Selling skins, baby crocodiles as ornaments, and a warning about them trying to sell fake buttons found in the crocodile's stomach.
A glimpse into a very different world, perhaps exoticized for the London reader.
A thoughtful piece suggests looking at children's play for clues to national problems.
Psychologists realizing the importance of why kids like or dislike things in the playground, linking individual psychology to bigger societal issues. Quite forward-thinking.
Sad news about a prison warder at Strangeways Jail, Percy Baker, taking his own life. He reportedly could not sleep.
Highlights the potential pressures of that kind of work.
Deaths of prominent figures also noted. Sir William Harrison Moore, an Australian jurist.
And the salvage operation continues on the sunken liner Egypt, trying to recover the last of its gold and silver treasure. A long-running saga.
A sign of tightening control in Germany. Goebbels banning the last foreign German-language newspaper, the Swiss Basler Nachrichten.
Closing down independent information sources. Very ominous.
A bizarre accident in Bridlington. A man broke both his legs when an omnibus backfired while he was starting it.
Ouch. Shows the dangers of machinery back then.
But good news for Cheshire potato farmers.
A shortage elsewhere means they're getting great prices, 25 pounds a ton, wiping out the effects of many lean years. A rare bit of agricultural prosperity reported.
Bureaucratic wrangling in Manchester over pedestrian crossings.
The City Council versus the Ministry of Transport over how many crossings are needed. The ministry wants more to provide a grant.
The local view. If the minister, Horbelisha, imposes his schemes, he should pay the whole cost. Classic local versus central government tension.
And finally, a rather charming anecdote about a river picnic and a visit to a rustic inn.
Enjoying the jolly company of the locals, buying drinks all round.
And overhearing a local saying their village opinions aren't swayed by London views, implying a sturdy local independence. A nice little snapshot of rural life.
So that gives us a pretty comprehensive picture from the London Daily Worker on this day in 1935. Fascism looming, empire fraying, domestic struggles, Soviet successes portrayed, and, well, life carrying on in all its variety.
Real mix, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, let's see what the view is like from Chicago. What was the American Daily Worker focusing on?
Right. Over to you for the U.S. perspective.
Thanks. Well, interestingly, the threat of fascism is also front and center here, but with perhaps a more immediate international flashpoint and distinct domestic angles.
How so?
They lead with what they call provocative actions by Japanese troops, specifically crossing the Soviet border in 3 separate raids.
Okay, so direct military aggression reported there, escalating tensions in the east.
Definitely framed that way. And domestically, there's a really strong warning about Roosevelt's NRA, the National Recovery Administration.
Which was supposed to be about economic recovery, right? Part of the New Deal.
Yes, but the Daily Worker here claims its real purpose is to drive the United States to war. A very stark interpretation.
Wow. Are they calling for action against it?
Absolutely. Quoting someone named Dunn, calling for immediate struggle against the NRA's economic and political consequences, which they say are already being felt. It's presented as an urgent danger.
They also seem to be targeting media figures. William Randolph Hearst gets a mention.
Oh, he does. Dirty Willie Hearst, they call him, accused of attacking the Communist Party.
And their argument is
That Hearst wouldn't attack them if they were like other, less radical unions, and that capitalists wouldn't advise miners to split ranks if the communists weren't effective. It's a class analysis of media attacks, seeing them as attempts to weaken the movement.
And tying back to the international scene, there's that headline, send Thielman to the U.S.
Yes. It directly connects the German anti-fascist fight with American labor. They report Ohio labor leaders and party figures are flaying NRA in the same breath.
So, linking the fight against perceived warmongering at home with the fight against fascism abroad.
Exactly. A common enemy, a united front, is the idea being pushed.
Okay, and on Japanese expansionism beyond those border raids.
The other main point is about China offering a reward for a General Pai. His mutinous troops, described as Japanese-inspired, had apparently taken refuge near Peiping.
So Japan is portrayed as actively destabilizing China through proxies.
Precisely. It fits that narrative of ongoing Japanese aggression and influence undermining regional stability.
Right. Let's look at injustice and inequality within the U.S. as reported by the Chicago paper.
A key issue highlighted is companies forcing married women out of their jobs.
The paper frames this economically, doesn't it?
Yes, stating that 40% of women in families work just to help pay off the capitalist class. It highlights both economic hardship and gender discrimination.
And there's a grim story from Harlan, Kentucky, a letter from a miner's wife.
Mrs. Lulu Bach. Her husband, a militant miner, got a life sentence, allegedly blamed for the death of a company gun thug who was actually killed by one of his own side.
So they claim he and two other militants were framed.
That's the assertion. Picked as the victims to pay with their freedom for his worthless life. It paints a picture of brutal injustice in the context of violent anti-union actions in the coalfields.
The paper also mentions the Communist Party analyzing the Supreme Court's decision on the NRA.
Yes, the party organizer publication was featuring reports on that. Shows they were engaging with the legal and constitutional battles around New Deal policies.
There's also a complex murder case reported from Detroit.
The slaying of a Mr. Dickinson. Robbery suspected as he carried cash. A manhunt is on for a man named Ferris, or Schweitzer.
And 3 women, cabaret entertainers, were arrested with him.
Yes. Dickinson was in Detroit investigating an inheritance claim by a former actress involving the wealthy Yaki family estate. Adds a layer of intrigue.
Police seem confident, awaiting a murder warrant. Autopsy showed 2 shots, no struggle.
It's a developing story. A mix of crime, money, and maybe some high society connections.
Meanwhile, in Arkansas, there's outright rebellion against a new sales tax.
Leaders open their stores deliberately ignoring the new 2% levy. Merchants pledge not to collect it, defying warnings from the Revenue Commissioner.
That's significant public resistance.
Very much so. Shows deep dissatisfaction with taxation policies.
Predatory lending is another focus. Loan sharks in Washington, D.C.
Charging up to 50% interest a year. A bill proposed limiting it to 2% a month.
Which some called fair, but not everyone agreed.
No, a Mrs. Jenks is quoted calling the bill vicious, arguing it still saddles desperate people with exorbitant rates. She even claims the loan shark lobby supports the bill, suggesting it's a weak compromise that benefits the lenders.
That's a cynical take on legislative reform.
It reflects deep suspicion about whether such bills truly help the poor.
Then there are changes to the AAA. The Agricultural Adjustment Act sounds like it limits legal challenges.
Big time. Amendments were set to make courts helpless to issue injunctions against penalties or taxes imposed by the Department of Agriculture. Affects everyone from farmers to retailers.
So companies paying processing taxes rushed to court before the changes took effect.
Exactly. Got injunctions to hold the tax money in court custody. But that window is closing fast. Once the amendments passed, that legal avenue would be shut off.
A major shift in power towards the government agency, away from the courts.
Definitely. A loss of legal recourse for those affected.
A truly horrific story comes from Greene County. A child murder.
Yes. The district attorney confirmed a confession from John Volkman for attacking and killing the young daughter of a Methodist minister, Reverend Ernest Glenn.
And Volkman played violin in the church. Adds a chilling layer.
It does. The community aspect is highlighted too. The victim's father asking the Presbyterian minister to pray for the killer's parents. Just tragic all around.
And in Chicago itself, a banker, Frank U.D. Sugarman, was arrested on dope charges.
He was already on parole for burglary, allegedly caught claiming morphine while fleeing arrest, and was shot by narcotic agents. A high-profile figure linked to drug trafficking.
Okay, let's look at poverty, unemployment, and strikes in the U.S. context. The coal strike situation seems critical.
It was huge. A strike involving over 400,000 miners across 38 states was postponed for a month.
John L. Lewis, the mine workers' president, sounded ready for a fight, though.
Absolutely. Said the union was solvent and prepared for a strike of any length if needed. Meanwhile, a coal stabilization bill, The Guffey-Snyder bill, backed by Roosevelt, was heading to Congress.
But facing constitutional challenges if passed.
Right. So a major industrial dispute potentially paused, but the underlying issues and legislative battles were far from resolved.
There's also a story of direct action workers refusing to unload scab cargo.
22 men stood their ground. Police were called, arrests made, charges of assault and obstructing free passage. Fines were issued.
And the International Labor Defense, ILD, was getting involved.
Planning to send organizers, including Angela Herndon, to support them, shows that Solidarity Network in action during direct confrontations.
Things sound tense in the Kansas lead and zinc mine strike, too. Military rule imposed.
Yes, the National Guard was in control in Galena. 2 strikers were arrested during an investigation into recent riots where people were injured and mine guards besieged. State intervention to quell labor unrest.
Roosevelt's wealth tax plan, it was causing quite a stir.
Big time. Facing opposition even from his traditional allies in the Solid South, radical Democrats preferred Huey Long's share the wealth ideas. Conservatives thought FDR blundered trying to appease the radicals.
And Huey Long himself, a powerful figure.
The dictator of Louisiana, they call him, controlled 10 electoral college votes. Hugely popular for building roads, providing free school books, cutting taxes.
But at a cost, Louisiana had massive debt.
30 million, largest in the U.S. And critics said he destroyed political liberty, controlling the legislature, judiciary, even the armed forces. A very controversial populist figure.
What were the specific criticisms of Roosevelt's tax plan from others?
Senator Vandenberg called it political strategy, not real reform. The National Association of Manufacturers attacked the graduated corporation tax as bad for consumers and investors.
And some compared it to Soviet doctrines.
Former Senator Jim Reed did, calling it violative of American principles, predicting economic chaos. So fierce opposition from various quarters.
Despite all this, the Treasury found the government was doing slightly better than expected financially.
Yes, $1.3 billion better off. But still facing a 6th unbalanced budget in a row. The underlying economic fragility remained.
And there were proposals to reform the NRA itself.
Secretary Roper's Business Advisory Council drafted legislation to merge the NRA with the Federal Trade Commission, creating a larger body.
With voluntary codes.
Yes, binding contracts offering relief from antitrust laws, but supposedly not allowing monopolies. An attempt to find a middle ground, perhaps, in regulating industry.
Okay, finally, let's touch on the human interest stories from the U.S. paper. Some grim statistics to start.
The auto accident toll. Travelers Insurance reported 15,200 deaths and 300,000 injuries nationwide in the first 6 months of 1935.
A slight reduction from the previous year, but still staggering numbers. Cook County, Chicago saw 360 deaths alone.
Yeah, the paper notes they tallied up with notorious regularity. Shows the sheer scale of the danger on the roads back then.
In Chicago, the police commissioner exposed a vice operation using want ads.
Disorderly houses posing as massage parlors. He recommended revoking their licenses. A little glimpse into the city's underbelly.
On a much lighter note, a beer-drinking champion was crowned in Wisconsin.
Barrett downed half a gallon in 30 seconds. Broke his own record. Joked he could have done better with more training. A bit of local fun.
Less fun. Golfers struck by lightning in Gary, Indiana.
5 knocked down, 1 seriously hurt. A reminder of nature's power.
A terrible motor coach crash reported from Italy as well.
6 young people killed, many injured. Carrying children singing hymns went off a cliff. Overcrowding was blamed. Parents apparently rushed extra kids onto the vehicles. Tragic.
Massive dynamite blasts planned at Niagara Falls.
At Table Rock, or Honeymoon Point, aiming to blast 1,000 tons of rock into the gorge. Huge engineering project.
The Los Angeles Times moved into a new building.
A big, smooth operation, leaving their old plant dark after 20 years. They took the opportunity to boast about their resilience and reader loyalty.
News of devastating floods in western Japan reached the U.S. papers, too.
River Chikugo overflowing after heavy rain. Thousands of homes inundated, hundreds of thousands displaced. Though ample warning apparently kept casualties relatively low, the scale was immense.
And echoing news from the U.K. paper, a mine blast in India.
At the Baghdadi Colliery. 16 miners killed, many missing. Another grim industrial tragedy.
A quick note about a prominent home, the Weyerhaeuser Jr. House in Tacoma, being put up for sale.
Just a small item, maybe of interest to wealthier readers or those tracking real estate.
An interesting fact about the world's deepest water well.
An oil well in Texas, where water flowed at over 11,000 feet deep. The total well depth was nearly 13,000 feet, Shows the incredible drilling capabilities even then.
Los Angeles was running a Safe July 4th Week campaign.
Police and fire departments cooperating to minimize accidents over the holiday. An early public safety initiative.
A funny little anecdote about cultural differences at a dinner party.
A guest embarrassed to see the King of Sweden's picture on a dinner plate, while the host had the Japanese emperor's image. Highlights etiquette and reverence for royalty.
And some medical news. A simple ice water test to detect susceptibility to high blood pressure.
Developed by Dr. George Brown. Said to identify hyperreactors prone to stress-related heart issues. Early preventative health ideas.
Support for boys' clubs as a way to prevent crime.
Seen as making good citizens by providing activities and character building. A focus on positive youth development.
And finally, a quick historical note about the Eastland steamship sinking in 1915.
Just a brief mention, perhaps triggered by an anniversary or related news item.
Okay, that covers the U.S. side. It's fascinating to see the parallels, the focus on fascism, labor struggles, economic hardship, but also the distinct American stories, like the NRA battles, Huey Long, the specific crime reports.
Absolutely. Both papers clearly filtering world and national events through that lens of class struggle, workers' rights, and anti-fascism, but the specific issues and characters obviously differ.
So that brings our exploration of the Daily Worker for July 1st, 1935 to an end. We've seen their perspective shaped by a very specific ideology, reporting on a world grappling with huge economic and political forces.
It really is like opening a time capsule, isn't it? Seeing the urgency they felt about fascism, about workers' conditions, about the threat of war.
And seeing how even the smaller human interest stories, the accidents, the local disputes, can sometimes reflect those larger tensions and realities of the time.
Definitely. So maybe something for you, the listener, to think about as we wrap up. Considering this consistent focus on class struggle, the critiques of the powerful in both the UK and US papers.
How might all these events we've talked about, the strikes, the government policies, the international conflicts, even the personal tragedies, be seen as direct results of the economic and political systems operating in 1935, at least through the Daily Worker's eyes?
Yeah, what kind of society were they ultimately arguing for? And how do the problems they highlighted suggest the kind of fundamental changes they believed were needed to build that different future? Something to ponder.